I'm Dr. Liena, and I need to share something that changed how I approach metabolic health completely. For the last 18 years practicing internal medicine, I've watched thousands of patients receive standard blood glucose tests, get told their numbers look fine, and then develop type 2 diabetes within 3 to 5 years. Their doctors weren't lying. Their test results genuinely showed normal fasting glucose levels, normal A1C readings, but something invisible was already destroying their metabolic machinery. And I want to walk you through exactly what that hidden sign is, why it matters more than your standard glucose test, and most importantly, what you can do about it starting today. The conventional approach to blood sugar screening is fundamentally incomplete. When your doctor checks your fasting glucose, they're taking a snapshot at one moment in time. It's like checking the temperature of a room at 6 a.m. and assuming it tells you the entire climate pattern for the day. You get a single data point that might show everything is fine, but what's happening during the other 23 hours? What's happening to your blood sugar after meals? What's happening during the stress of your workday? What's happening when you haven't slept properly? These are the moments when your metabolic dysfunction is actually developing, and your fasting glucose test completely misses them. I started noticing this pattern about 7 years ago when a patient named Margaret came to my clinic. She was 54 years old, active, no family history of diabetes, and her fasting glucose was 92 milligrams per deciliter, which is textbook normal. Her A1C was 5.8%, right at the borderline, but technically still in the normal range. I gave her the standard reassurance that her blood sugar was fine and sent her on her way. 18 months later, she came back with crushing fatigue, constant thirst, and her A1C had jumped to 7.2%. She'd developed type 2 diabetes in less than 2 years, despite having normal baseline readings. When I dug deeper with continuous glucose monitoring, something shocking appeared. Her blood sugar wasn't staying stable throughout the day. After meals, her glucose would spike to 160, 170 milligrams per deciliter. For someone supposedly in the normal range, these spikes were extraordinary. And here's what I didn't understand at the time. Those spikes were already triggering the cascade of dysfunction that leads to full diabetes. Your fasting glucose test is missing the real culprit. The hidden sign I'm talking about is something called postprandial glucose dysregulation, which is a more clinical way of saying your blood sugar spikes abnormally after you eat, even though it looks fine when you're fasting. But there's something even more important happening beneath those spikes that most doctors never explain. Every time your blood sugar spikes significantly, your pancreas releases a surge of insulin to bring it back down. If this is happening repeatedly, multiple times per day, something insidious develops. Your cells become resistant to that insulin signal. They stop listening. Your pancreas responds by making more insulin to force the signal through. This is insulin resistance, and it's the real foundation of metabolic disease. And here's the problem. Insulin resistance doesn't show up on standard blood work until it's already severe. Your fasting glucose stays normal because your pancreas is still compensating, still producing enough insulin to keep things under control. But your cells are getting progressively less sensitive to that insulin with every single meal. By the time your fasting glucose rises or your A1C climbs, you're already years into the disease process. The hidden sign that reveals insulin resistance before it shows up on standard tests is something most people have never heard of. It's called the fasting insulin level. And it's the single most overlooked measurement in modern medicine. When you fast overnight, your insulin should drop to a baseline level. If you've had no food for 12 hours, your pancreas should only be releasing a trickle of insulin to maintain basic metabolic function. In a metabolically healthy person, fasting insulin is below 12 microunits per milliliter, ideally below 7. But when insulin resistance is developing, your pancreas has to keep pumping out more insulin just to maintain normal fasting glucose. I've seen fasting insulin levels of 20, 30, even 40 microunits per milliliter in people with completely normal fasting glucose numbers. Their pancreas is working overtime in a futile attempt to keep blood sugar normal. That's the hidden sign. That's the warning system your standard tests are missing. Let me show you exactly what this looks like. Imagine two patients, both with fasting glucose of 95 milligrams per deciliter, both completely normal according to standard screening. Patient A has fasting insulin of 5 microunits per milliliter. Patient B has fasting insulin of 32 microunits per milliliter. By every conventional metric, they're in the same health category. But metabolically, they're in different universes. Patient A's pancreas is barely working. It's efficiently controlling blood sugar with minimal effort. Patient B's pancreas is exhausted. It's releasing 6 times more insulin just to maintain the same glucose level. Patient B is in the early stages of insulin resistance and metabolic decline, but no doctor would catch it because they're not measuring fasting insulin. After discovering this pattern, I started requesting fasting insulin levels on every patient who came to me with metabolic concerns or family history of diabetes. The results were shocking. Approximately 38% of people with completely normal fasting glucose and normal A1C had elevated fasting insulin levels, indicating insulin resistance. These are people walking around believing they're metabolically healthy, when in reality they're already developing the foundation of type 2 diabetes. And the tragedy is that this is the exact moment when intervention works best. When insulin resistance is just beginning, before the pancreas starts to fail, dietary and lifestyle changes can completely reverse the trajectory. But you have to know to look for it. Here's what's actually happening at the cellular level. Insulin resistance develops through a combination of factors, but the primary culprit is chronic hyperinsulinemia, meaning consistently elevated insulin levels. This happens because modern diets, especially diets high in refined carbohydrates and processed foods, cause repeatedly elevated blood sugar throughout the day. Your pancreas responds by releasing more insulin, but refined carbohydrates don't just cause blood sugar spikes. They cause something else that most people don't realize. They trigger the release of hormones that make your cells even more insulin resistant. It's a vicious cycle. High carbohydrate intake causes blood sugar spikes, which causes excessive insulin release, which causes your cells to become less responsive to insulin, which causes your pancreas to release even more insulin, which accelerates the development of insulin resistance. This is why simply counting calories or focusing on weight loss without addressing insulin dynamics often fails. You can lose weight and still be developing type 2 diabetes because you haven't fixed the underlying insulin resistance. The hidden sign is telling you something is wrong, but if you're not measuring it, you keep going down the same path. Now, beyond fasting insulin, there are other hidden signs your standard blood work is missing. The second hidden sign is something called the triglyceride to HDL ratio. When I look at a lipid panel, most doctors focus on total cholesterol or LDL cholesterol. But the triglyceride to HDL ratio is one of the most powerful predictors of insulin resistance and cardiovascular disease that exists. In a metabolically healthy person, triglycerides should be below 150 milligrams per deciliter, and HDL should be above 50 milligrams per deciliter for women, above 40 for men. More importantly, the ratio of triglycerides divided by HDL should be below 2. Any higher and you're looking at someone with significant insulin resistance. I had another patient, David, who came to me at age 47 with a triglyceride level of 240 milligrams per deciliter and HDL of 32 milligrams per deciliter. His triglyceride to HDL ratio was 7.5. His fasting glucose was 98. His A1C was 5.9, both technically normal. His doctor had told him everything was fine. But that ratio was screaming that his cells were insulin resistant, that his liver was overproducing triglycerides due to excessive insulin signaling, and that he was headed toward metabolic disease. Within 4 years, without intervention, he developed type 2 diabetes. The hidden sign had predicted it, but no one was listening to it. The third hidden sign is something called uric acid levels. This one surprises most people because they don't associate uric acid with blood sugar metabolism. But elevated uric acid is a marker of insulin resistance. When your insulin levels are chronically elevated, your kidneys reabsorb more uric acid instead of excreting it. So elevated fasting uric acid, especially levels above 5.5 milligrams per deciliter, indicates your kidneys are responding to high insulin signaling. It's another piece of evidence that insulin resistance is developing even if your glucose tests look normal. The fourth hidden sign is something visible in your body that you might be ignoring. It's the accumulation of visceral fat, the dangerous fat that wraps around your organs. You can't always see this in the mirror. You might look relatively slim and still have significant visceral fat accumulation. This fat is metabolically toxic. It pumps out inflammatory chemicals and directly contributes to insulin resistance. If you've noticed your waist circumference increasing even though your weight hasn't changed much, that's a hidden sign. Your body is accumulating the specific type of fat that drives metabolic disease. For men, a waist circumference above 40 inches indicates significant metabolic risk. For women, above 35 inches. These measurements are more predictive of developing diabetes than BMI. The fifth hidden sign involves looking at your skin and your extremities. Acanthosis nigricans is a condition where you develop dark, velvety patches of skin, usually in skin folds like the neck, underarms, or behind the knees. Most people and most doctors miss this or misinterpret it. But acanthosis nigricans is a direct marker of insulin resistance. When your insulin levels are chronically elevated, they trigger growth signals in your skin cells. Those dark patches are literally your skin responding to high insulin. If you see this, it's a neon sign that you have insulin resistance, whether or not your glucose tests show it. Now here's what I want you to understand about why these hidden signs matter so much. The standard approach to diabetes prevention waits until the disease is already significantly developed before intervening. By the time your fasting glucose is consistently over 126 or your A1C crosses 6.5%, your pancreas has already started to fail. You've already damaged your blood vessels. Your kidneys have already begun to be affected. The insulin-producing cells in your pancreas have already started to die. But when you catch insulin resistance through these hidden signs, you catch it in a window where reversal is actually possible. I worked with a patient named Jennifer who had elevated fasting insulin of 28 microunits per milliliter, a triglyceride to HDL ratio of 4.2, and a waist circumference of 38 inches. Her fasting glucose was 91 and her A1C was 5.7. By conventional standards, she had no diabetes risk. But by the hidden signs, she had significant insulin resistance. I put her on a protocol focused not on weight loss, but on insulin reduction. We eliminated refined carbohydrates, especially those that caused rapid glucose spikes. We increased her intake of soluble fiber, which slows glucose absorption and improves insulin sensitivity. We added specific nutrients known to support pancreatic function and reduce hepatic fat. And we implemented resistance training 3 times per week, which is one of the most powerful interventions for improving insulin sensitivity at the cellular level. After 12 weeks, her fasting insulin dropped to 14 microunits per milliliter. Her triglyceride to HDL ratio improved to 2.1. Her waist circumference decreased by 2 inches. Her fasting glucose stayed essentially the same, 92, because it never needed to drop. But the hidden signs showed that her insulin resistance was reversing. She wasn't developing diabetes. She was getting healthier. And the key was that we caught it early enough to make a real difference. This is what most people don't understand about metabolic health. The disease doesn't start when your glucose numbers get abnormal. It starts years earlier when insulin resistance is quietly developing. And the moment you have any of these hidden signs, your body is already sending you a message. It's telling you that your current lifestyle, your current diet, your current activity level is not compatible with your metabolic health. The question is whether you're going to listen. So what should you actually do if you suspect you have insulin resistance despite normal glucose tests? First, request a fasting insulin level. When you go to your doctor, ask for this specific test. Most doctors won't order it unless you ask. The standard metabolic panel doesn't include it. Make sure you're fasting for 12 hours before the test, and ideally avoid stress and poor sleep the night before, since both can artificially elevate insulin. Second, calculate your HOMA-IR score, which stands for Homeostatic Model Assessment for Insulin Resistance. It's a simple calculation. Multiply your fasting glucose by your fasting insulin and divide by 405. Any score above 2.0 indicates insulin resistance. This is a more accurate predictor of metabolic dysfunction than fasting glucose alone. Third, look at your complete lipid panel and calculate your triglyceride to HDL ratio. If it's above 2, you have evidence of insulin resistance. Fourth, measure your waist circumference. Grab a tape measure and measure around your natural waist, right at the level of your belly button. This is more important than your weight or BMI for predicting metabolic disease. Fifth, examine your skin for any dark patches or areas of thickened skin that might indicate acanthosis nigricans. Sixth, check your fasting uric acid level. If it's above 5.5 milligrams per deciliter, this is another marker of insulin resistance. Once you have this information, here's what actually reverses insulin resistance. The most important intervention is eliminating foods that cause rapid blood sugar spikes. This primarily means refined carbohydrates and processed foods. I'm not saying you need to go keto or eliminate all carbohydrates, but the carbohydrates you eat should be whole food sources with significant fiber content. Steel-cut oats, quinoa, legumes, sweet potatoes, and vegetables are fine. Refined white bread, packaged snacks, sugary drinks, and most processed foods need to go. The difference is enormous. Refined carbohydrates trigger massive insulin spikes. Whole food carbohydrates with fiber trigger much smaller, more gradual glucose responses. Second, increase soluble fiber intake. Soluble fiber literally slows how quickly glucose enters your bloodstream. It feeds beneficial gut bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids that improve insulin sensitivity. Aim for at least 10 grams of soluble fiber daily from sources like oats, beans, apples, and Brussels sprouts. Third, prioritize protein intake, especially at breakfast. Protein stimulates glucagon, which counteracts insulin signaling, and it creates satiety so you eat fewer calories overall. Getting 30 to 40 grams of protein at breakfast sets up your entire day for better blood sugar control. Fourth, incorporate resistance training. This is crucial. Resistance training, meaning weight training or body weight exercises that challenge your muscles, is one of the most powerful ways to improve insulin sensitivity. When your muscles contract, they pull glucose directly from your bloodstream independent of insulin. A single resistance training session can improve insulin sensitivity for up to 48 hours. Fifth, ensure adequate sleep. When you sleep poorly, your cortisol levels stay elevated, your body becomes more insulin resistant, and your appetite for sugary foods increases. Getting 7 to 9 hours of consistent sleep is non-negotiable for metabolic health. Sixth, manage stress. Chronic stress elevates cortisol and adrenaline, both of which increase insulin resistance and promote visceral fat accumulation. Even 20 minutes of daily meditation or deep breathing can significantly reduce stress hormones. Seventh, consider specific micronutrients. Chromium helps your cells respond better to insulin. Berberine, a plant compound, has been shown in multiple studies to be as effective as metformin for improving insulin sensitivity. Alpha-lipoic acid reduces visceral fat and improves glucose metabolism. These aren't magic, but they support the fundamental changes you're making through diet and exercise. Here's what I want to emphasize. You cannot supplement your way out of insulin resistance. You cannot take a pill that fixes bad eating habits. But once you've made the foundational changes in your diet and activity level, targeted supplementation can accelerate your improvement. The order matters. First, fix your diet. Second, establish consistent exercise and sleep. Third, add targeted supplementation if needed. I've seen this approach reverse insulin resistance in hundreds of patients. And every single one of them tells me the same thing afterward. They wish they'd known about these hidden signs earlier. They wish someone had measured their fasting insulin and triglyceride to HDL ratio 5 or 10 years earlier before the damage accumulated. They wish they'd understood that normal fasting glucose doesn't mean metabolic health. Let me tell you about one more patient, because I think his story really captures what's at stake. His name was Michael, and he was only 38 years old when he came to me. He considered himself healthy. He went to the gym a few times a week. He thought he ate pretty well. His fasting glucose was 93. His A1C was 5.8. His doctor had cleared him at his last checkup. But his fasting insulin was 35 microunits per milliliter. His triglyceride to HDL ratio was 6.1. His waist circumference was 41 inches despite being relatively lean in his upper body. When I explained to him that these hidden signs indicated he was in significant insulin resistance, he was shocked. How could he be metabolically unhealthy when his blood sugar looked normal? I ordered continuous glucose monitoring, which measures his blood sugar throughout the day. The results were eye-opening. After breakfast, his glucose would spike to 165 milligrams per deciliter. After lunch, 170. After dinner, 155. His fasting glucose stayed normal only because his pancreas was working overtime at night, in a sense recovering from the day's glucose abuse. But that overtime work was destroying his metabolic health. I put him on an insulin reduction protocol. We focused on whole food carbohydrates, consistent protein intake, resistance training 4 times per week, and improving his sleep. After 16 weeks, his fasting insulin dropped to 18 microunits per milliliter. His continuous glucose monitoring showed post-meal spikes now maxing out around 120 milligrams per deciliter. His waist circumference decreased by 3 inches. More importantly, Michael understood that he'd caught something serious before it became irreversible. He wasn't destined to develop type 2 diabetes. His hidden signs had revealed the problem, and he'd intervened in time. This is the power of understanding what your standard blood tests are missing. This is what happens when you listen to the hidden signs your body is sending you. Here's what I want you to do starting today. If you haven't had your fasting insulin level checked, schedule a doctor's appointment and request it specifically. Write it down if you need to. Bring a list of these hidden signs to discuss. Calculate your current health metrics. Check your triglyceride to HDL ratio. Measure your waist circumference. Look at your skin. If any of these signs are present, you have evidence of insulin resistance regardless of what your glucose tests say. Start making dietary changes today. You don't need to wait for perfect conditions or for next Monday or for the new year. You don't need to overhaul your entire diet overnight. Pick one change. Maybe it's eliminating sugary drinks. Maybe it's adding protein to breakfast. Maybe it's doing 3 resistance training sessions this week. One change creates momentum. One change leads to another. Your metabolic health is not determined by your genes. It's not determined by your age. It's determined by what you do every single day. And the hidden signs are your body's way of telling you what you need to do. The conventional approach waits until disease is obvious. But you now understand something most people don't. You know that the hidden signs reveal metabolic dysfunction years before standard tests catch it. You know that fasting insulin, triglyceride to HDL ratio, visceral fat accumulation, and other hidden signs are the real indicators of your metabolic trajectory. And most importantly, you know that when these signs are present, you're in a window of opportunity to reverse course. Thank you for watching. If this information resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Most people are walking around with hidden insulin resistance, and their doctors aren't even looking for it. If you want deeper information on how specific foods affect your insulin response or how to implement an insulin reduction protocol, check out my other videos on metabolic health. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss future content on the science of metabolic disease and how to prevent it. The hidden signs are always there. The question is whether you're going to pay attention to them.